Okay, we are back to talk about Barry Season 4, Episode 8, titled Wow, the series finale, which aired May 28th, 2023, written and directed by Bill Hader. In this series finale, Hank calls Fuchs to tell him that he has captured Sally and John, holding them hostage. It prompts Fuchs and his men to come visit Hank and his men. The two sides prepare for some kind of showdown. Fuchs tells Hank he will leave forever if Hank admits to killing Cristobal. Hank refuses, and a shootout takes place, killing everyone in the room except for Fuchs, Sally, and John. Barry, after making a quick stop at Walmart to buy an arsenal of guns, shows up after this shootout is over, and Fuchs gives him his family back, then disappears to parts unknown. Detectives Moss and Buckner announce that Gene Cousineau is the primary suspect in the reopened Janice Moss murder investigation. Seeing this, Sally tries to convince Barry to turn himself in, but Barry refuses, saying that he's been redeemed because all three of them, him, Sally, and John, are alive. Sally and John sneak out and leave the next morning without telling Barry, which causes Barry to go on the hunt for them. He searches for them at Gene's house, and while doing so, Gene shoots and kills Barry. Several years later, Sally is a high school theater teacher. John seems to be a normal, well-adjusted teen. And the episode ends with John going over to a friend's house, being shown a biopic called The Mask Collector that's about his dad and Gene Cousineau, where Gene is portrayed as the villain and Barry, the hero, with a tragic story. This was your choice as your favorite episode of the past 12 months. What makes that so?
Well, I mean, it's just hilarious. Like I was laughing at your like reading my hand, and I don't know. I understand it's very dark humor. It's like black comedy, it's going on here, and that's the kind of main line that I want to hit in talking about it. But it's always very difficult to, I don't know, make an argument like it's funny. So,
Yeah.
like, let me lead you to see how it's funny. But hopefully, people can appreciate the humor here. And I guess the other part of why I want to talk about it, I've kind of wanted to talk about it since it aired. Because I watched this episode and I thought, man, this is like one of the best series finales I've ever seen. I am by the end of this final season of Barry asking myself, is Barry one of the best TV shows ever? And this was happening in the shadows of Succession.
Yes,
Yes, the
yes.
series finale of Succession aired on the same night right before this, and so on. It just seemed like everyone in the world wanted to talk about Succession. It was very hard to find those who want to talk about Barry.
I,
So let's
I,
talk
I'm
about
glad you
Barry.
brought that up because as we talk about sort of things that may have aged well or aged poorly, it's, why was the decision made to do this? Because I found myself enjoying this, being able to soak it in, absorb it on its own, and not in context with that other finale. Now 12 months, almost 12 months later, I enjoyed it much, much more than I did trying to have it compete with the other one, for whatever, brain power I could give to both. This sort of, I feel like 12 months later deserved more time to breathe on its own than being on that same night. Why they made the decision, I don't know, but I wish now that they had done it differently.
I do wonder if Bill Hader wanted it to air the night before Memorial Day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no inside information on that, whatever, and I haven't read anything in interviews or anything like that. I do find it kind of funny, though, that is how it went, given, as you mentioned, the very end of the episode, where you have, like, that's part of what I think is so brilliant, is we have the truth. I mean, like, obviously, it's a fictional show and all of
Mhm.
that, but we know who Barry is. We know what he's done. We know he killed Janice. We know that, like, all of this stuff. And then to end on this inversion of that through the film, which is preposterous, but like you could also see them making that film based on the information that they have. So I don't know. I really did think it was kind of a brilliant move to end it that way.
Yeah, the finale seemed to maybe lock something into my brain that was, there were these suspicions about Cousineau that Moss and Buckner had. They were pursuing him, looking at him in terms of the suspect for Janice Moss's murder. And because of this, and because of, I guess, what Barry did to his turn his life upside down. He kills Barry. So then it's sort of I don't know, it's sort of a confirmation bias. Oh, clearly Gene must have been responsible for all this because he definitively, unequivocally killed Barry. So that sort of told the story by that action.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess since we're starting here, we'll just start here, right? I'm not gonna
Yeah.
fight it. One of the things that happens consistently throughout the entire show is the cops get things wrong.
Hmm.
And a lot of things factor into the sights landing on Gene, including when Janice's father, and for some reason I can't remember his name in this show. I'm just thinking of the actor's name in The Wire. Apologies. Anyway, he like at
Oh
one
yeah. Oh
point
yeah. You're talking about not Jim Moss. What's his name
that
on
might
this?
be right.
Yeah, Jim Moss. Yeah.
That might be right. Yeah. At one point, he's got Barry captive in his basement. And he's interrogating him and so on. And something Barry says about giving Gene money
Yes.
pings, and then he's got the notebook that I think came from Patrick Fischler's character. And he puts things together, and he's like, "Oh man, Gene was actually behind this, right?" And then you've got what happened to Gene's son, who ended up Gene shot him, right? If
Yes.
you recall all of that in the background, right? Like if you're just rewatching the finale, maybe I'm refreshing people's memories about all of that, sort of how that comes together. So by the time you reach this episode, um, they also kind of entrapped Gene through this idea of making a movie with
Yeah.
Daniel Day-Lewis, right? This was maybe in the previous episode. Gene himself has been missing for years and has just
Right.
come back to oppose the idea of this film that they're going to make and so on, right? I don't know. You need to rewatch everything to get clear on all these details, but they've already got him in their sights by the end of this episode. I'm thinking that he was actually the one behind all of this, and that includes his son. If you
Yes.
catch this, as Gene is sitting there reading news stories, and his son has told the press something like, "I found out, so my dad shot me."
My house was bought with drug money.
And I'd be like, "This is all hilarious. Come on,
Yeah.
I don't know." Um, of course, this movie is also sad and so on and so forth, right? But like,
Yeah.
that's part of what I think is so brilliant, maybe about the show in general, but particularly about this episode and this final stretch of Barry,
Yeah.
that I feel like it's consistently funny, but it's also quite often something else too. And I hardly know how to put this in the right way. I know some people watch Barry and think, oh, it becomes more of a drama,
Hmm.
you know. I think it's always a comedy. It's always like black humor,
Yeah.
but it can manage to be um black humor and horror at the same time. Or in some of the scenes in this episode, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have a better word than drama. But like
Yeah.
you think about that standoff between Fuchs and Hank, and it's just like emotionally poignant and kind of like
Hmm.
tearing my guts out, and like, man, Hank and Cristobal and so on. Like I'm practically crying. And at the same time, Fuchs says, like, it always is. It's like that's hilarious.
And to have this scene we're talking about, so many people, so emotional, so just to use your word, so poignant and sort of invested in sort of what those two main characters are feeling, and then a shootout starts and it's over literally in 4 seconds. Right? It's just so it just ends. It's just done.
Also funny,
Yeah.
I think, right? Like, and then that's good. I'm glad you said that because it's another thing I want to talk about is how that scene plays out. It's like hyper violent
Yeah.
and I think funny and fast. And so without getting too into the weeds of like theory and philosophy and stuff, I think that I do think about surrealism, and in particular, there's this bit in Andre Breton's Manifesto of Surrealism where he rejects realism, but at the same time he's claiming surrealism is realer. It's closer to
Mhm.
life. It's truer to life, right? That realism in its framing precisely cuts out the absurd, the dreamlike, the kind of weird, the synchronicities and things that actually characterize our life experience
Yeah.
itself, right? And so in that way, I mean, if you think about that hyper violent scene, if you think about how that would really go, you almost never see this in a TV show or film, but it's probably what Barry presents is probably way closer to how it would go than what you do
Yeah.
generally see.
You would generally see everybody gets to go hide behind something. There's a 10-minute shootout. You're
Slow motion,
exactly,
you know.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's a sort of also a commentary on what you're saying on, this is hyper absurdity, hyper violence, sort of hyper emotional response. It's just a reflection on what I think our talking about realism, our real lives are like, that there are these absurd moments that don't just, you can't understand them, can't explain them, can't define them. And he just sort of put those all in steroids and showed like what, from the perspective of these different characters, what that might be like.
Yeah, and then it dwells with it. The camera does, right? The aftermath.
Hmm.
You said in your summary that everyone dies, which I guess is probably true, but certainly not immediately,
Yeah.
because you end up seeing like the guy with half his leg blown off and he's
Yeah.
lamenting, and people start tending to one another. And Fuchs is like very slowly, the shepherd John out of the room with his hands over his eyes. And you
Yeah.
hear Sally in the background going, John, and then it's slow, right? It's like the violence is fast and then it's slow, which I also think is probably sort of true to life, but it creates all these moments where what you're seeing is really, really dark,
Hmm.
like this guy talking about why can't I feel my leg or whatever, but at the same time manages to hit the humor, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that he always, whether it was before the shootout, whether it was the reactions after, whether it was the scene of Barry going preparing to be a part of that shootout, there's always something where he's going to insert that and try to make you understand that, again, I like the word absurdity, that all of this stuff, no matter how dramatic and emotional and violent it might be, is all just a level of absurd, and absurd is funny.
Well, but then also not necessarily implausible, right? So like the scene where he goes into Walmart because of the counter, goes guns.
Yeah, lots of guns.
What kind? And
Yeah.
he's like got the gun strapped on him, and more than
Yeah.
words is playing
Again,
on it.
hyper realism, the idea, or hyper surrealism, the idea that you're not going to be able to walk out of Walmart with three, machine guns, but you can go, and a few days later you're going to be approved and you're going to get them, right? There's just sort of this idea of, yeah, it might just be that simple to go and get some of these things at some point.
Right. And then he's trying to get into the car with the gun strapped on him. And he like struggles to get into the car. All these little moments. And I don't know,
Yeah,
you mentioned something about like, can you actually go into a store and just buy guns like that in California? And I want to agree with what you said, but I do
yeah.
recall seeing someone last year saying this was more realistic than we thought.
Oh, I thought there was
Um,
some kind of waiting period for automatic weapons. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think so. I didn't double check this again. Regardless of, even if it's not that blatant, like you could
Yeah.
walk into Walmart today and walk out um, with like two assault rifles or whatever. Yeah, hopefully, it lands a certain social point anyway. It's pretty
Yeah.
easy
Yeah.
to get your hands on a gun in the United States.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
So what do you think happened? We get no, as I understand it, no resolution to Fuchs after this gun
yeah,
battle, after this handoff of family. What is your understanding or theory of what happened to him?
yeah, good. Let's talk about Fuchs. We should run through the characters because I mean,
Yeah.
this is the series finale, and one of the things it does is, I think, kind of resolve each character in a certain way. Of course, a couple die.
Yeah.
Fuchs doesn't, as you say. Fuchs is so interesting. You know, I almost feel like we have to go way, way back and think about Fuchs and the relationship between Fuchs and Barry. and there's a kind of paternal relationship,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then they turn on each other multiple times over the course of the series, forgive each other multiple times over the course of the
Yeah.
series, all this fraught stuff. And I think, and I thought this when I watched this last year, um, and the impression was strengthened for me rewatching it for you know this. So the episode starts basically with Fuchs in the tub, and he gets a call from Hank.
Yeah.
And at first he's like, "No, I'm not coming to your office." But you just like, because
Yeah.
they've been, I think the last we saw them, Hank was like trying to like blow up Fuchs with missiles or whatever. Um, but then Hank mentions that he's got Sally, and then pans or on a video chat, and Fuchs sees John, who I believe prior to this moment he did not know existed, and says, "Is that his son?" Right? Um, and so my impression is that Fuchs,
Yes.
something in Fuchs turns in that moment.
Hmm.
His interest is in Barry's son, and maybe already in reuniting Barry with his son, as opposed to where he was 30 seconds ago, which was, "I got to kill Barry, who betrayed me," right? Um, and that would explain why when he shows up, Hank only brings out Sally, which makes some sense, right? Like
Yeah.
protect the kid. And Fuchs insists that he brings out John, and then Fuchs is the one who, he falls on John as the shootout happens to protect him, and then leads him out of the room. And then Barry's there, and John reunites with Barry, and Fuchs just kind of like nods. "All
Yeah.
right, good, we're good, it's over."
I,
You
I
know,
I read that sort of paternal passing of the torch, as it were. I think just like you did, the idea that Fuchs played that role for so long for Barry when Barry didn't have that otherwise, and now he sees that Barry is, despite what Fuchs may want to do to him and what he feels about Barry, Barry now has to play that role for John. And so sort of this here, your turn type of thing, even though Barry's already been doing that. But yeah, just sort of this, not a you're going to follow my path, but you're going to have to take on the responsibility that I had for so long with you. That he's now responsible for John.
yeah, and maybe almost something like a "do it right, don't make the mistakes I made" kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, but there's no words passed between them, but yeah, I definitely read along those lines. And what happens to Fuchs next? I don't know. It's left to our imaginations. Was that uh, was that all of his guys? Was that all of his men with him when he went? Like, did they all die? Did his whole crew die?
Yeah, like there were some people crawling around and bleeding pretty heavily. So who knows if they're all dead or not?
Yeah, and I have the feeling I think that was kind of everyone. You got to remember in the most recent episodes here, Fuchs has come out of prison and now he's got this crew and he is a badass
Yeah,
gangster, and like
yeah,
he goes to the coffee shop and orders a coffee, and now the barista is woman, because he looks at her the right way, which is all hilarious and great. And then those scenes with his crew, but I think that was pretty much all of his guys. Um, Given what's happened also with Hank, I don't know. I mean, I guess I just imagine him going off and doing something else, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. His watches ended, as it were, and yeah. What else can he do if he can't be if he doesn't have a group or a crew where he can be the gangster? If he doesn't have a guy that he can be a parent to, what's left for him to do?
Maybe we'll like go back to Chechnya, you know? He had
Yeah,
like a good thing going. Remember the
yeah,
goats
that's
and,
right.
and all of that?
He did seem peaceful there. That's right.
Yeah. So maybe we'll do something like that. I don't know. I guess it's been, though, actually thinking about the narrative timeline of the show, it's been like a good 8 years or more
Yeah,
between these things because of the time jumps. And
yeah,
I appreciate the time jumps, both the one that happened earlier in the season. That one was more shocking.
yes,
And in one episode, getting the next episode, it just jumped 8 or 9 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That was and I think that was shocking in the moment just to see. I think it was there was no one expecting that to be the path that show was taking. It was like this massive 8, 9, 10 year jump.
Yeah, which I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe there are people out there who disagree, but I do recall reading an interview with Bill Hader and basically said there's no point in he felt like there was no point in how they get from the one to the other,
Yeah.
you know. I feel like the interview was asking him, "Oh, well, did you map out the details about what happened between Sally and Barry and Hader just said, "No, that's boring."
But
Whatever.
and even so, you picked it up along the way. They are in disguise, in hiding. Hey, Barry has tried to turn his life to something where he can be redeemed, where he can try to do his best so that he can make up for the actions of the past. You picked all that up along the way. There wasn't any need for any explaining of all that.
Yeah, I mean, well, Barry had just escaped from prison and so on. So I mean, I think there were some people who were like, "How'd they get out? How they made the cops?" It's just like,
Yeah.
Hater himself was like, "Yeah, doesn't matter."
Yeah.
Um, what did you think about how Hank's story ended?
This was, I was thinking about this as it happened, that he sort of has this breakdown, this breakdown emotionally while Fuchs is talking to him. And then it's all of a sudden it's a 180. It's a no. It's I know what I did wrong. I know that I'm responsible. I know that I'm the one that killed him. Wait, you're a liar. You're putting this into my head. Guys, shoot him, whatever. I think that Hank's character, I don't know. I can't say that I love the way that it just ended for him like that. I wish there had been some sort of, not saying I wanted him to be able to get revenge, for him to be able to get sort of retribution, but he just almost got, I mean, he got nothing, I guess. He got Fuchs talking down on him and then getting shot. I mean, it was just, I don't know, kind of an unceremonious ending for what I thought was a pretty good character for 4 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's kind of tragic. I mean, you need the backstory of what happened, where he and Cristobal were. It's like they were going to be um, kind criminals, We would
Yeah.
get the gangs together, everyone take care of everyone. We can all be friends. We were uniting rival factions at the Dave and the Busters. And we kind of remember that whole thing. And Hank Cristobal were so great, you
Yeah.
know. And I know Hader agrees on that too from interviews I read. He loved seeing them together, but how does that story end, right? The Chechians come back in and well, you have to uh, be with us. They kill these other guys that they've been friendly with, and so on. And Cristobal refuses to go along, so then they kill Cristobal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember all of that. So Hank has sold out Cristobal, but also didn't have a lot of a choice, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's part of what we have to remember is that at least this is what Hank has been telling himself is that he had no choice. There was nothing else he could have done.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Cristobal refused to make the decision that would have saved his life, which would have been to go along.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. I'm remembering all of that now. Yeah.
Right. So, I do think that Hank feels guilt about that, and he should. And Fuchs isn't quite wrong. And now he's sort of set things up. He's got a statue of Cristobal there. And there's a level of that which is just kind of dissembling or
Yeah.
delusional. And Fuchs is pushing on that, right? So I think the emotional response from Hank is quite real. And then at the turn, also, though, it's that he's not going to let Fuchs win or something. I don't know. It
Yeah.
makes it
Yeah.
makes sense to me in a way that I find hard to articulate fully, I guess. But I thought it worked.
Yeah. I like the idea of him not wanting Fuchs to win, even if winning means emotionally or mentally or anything like that. He's not going to let Fuchs have that satisfaction, knowing what's probably coming now that these two rival gangs are against each other. No matter what's about to happen, he's not going to let Fuchs sort of have that over him as things come to an end.
Yeah. And maybe, you know what, maybe there's also kind of there's a weird parallel or resonance, working through those details. I was just reminding us of what did he do when the Chechens showed back up, is he did make the move of what was going to allow him to survive, even though it meant giving up on what he and Cristobal had been working for together, really.
Yeah.
So, like maybe he felt some parallel between that and then what Fuchs is pushing him to, to uh, maybe almost feeling it like him being pushed to betray himself so that
Mm.
they can leave peacefully and everything will be okay. And then also, what's the last thing Hank says? He says something like, "You're a liar." So
Yeah,
also
exactly.
moves to like, I don't actually believe that. You're not
Yeah.
going to like hold up your end of the bargain here. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely thought it worked. Definitely sad to see NoHo Hank gunned down. It was sad to see Cristobal gone down. They managed to do it in a way that still gets humor out of it, I think,
Yeah.
with the statue and then reaching up and holding that hand of a well-written statue.
And that was, I think, in the grand scheme, one of the brilliant things about this series is no matter where it went, especially towards the last two seasons, Hader was always able to infuse that humor, even with a little bit of the absurd or dark humor. He was always able to keep that in there in some of the darkest, more emotional stories that you can find.
Yeah, and I tell you what, part of this is I have so much um, respect and admiration for Bill Hader as a director
Yeah.
coming out of this final season. He directed the entire season, he directed this episode. I can't wait to see what he does next, whatever it is, and make a film or whatever.
Yeah.
Just to some of the directorial decisions. Thing too, like so, if we talk about Sally, so they get out of this. This is also quite funny, right? So Sally's insisting that Barry turns himself in. They're lying in bed. He goes, "Yeah, I don't think that's what God has in mind for them." You're tired. I'm tired.
Yeah. We've been through a lot. We'll feel
Um,
better.
so that's all hilarious. But then what I was about to reference is when he wakes up and they're gone, the way that scene is filmed, the way that it sticks with the shot of the bed
Yeah.
as Barry gets up and he's calling for Sally and John, and you kind of like see him enter the frame in the background and things like that. Oh, this is brilliant because like that shot communicates with that. We know that they're not there.
Right.
So there's no need to follow Barry as he finds out and confirms that they're not there. We already know that, and we know that
Yeah.
immediately, I think, and then sticking with that shot just continues to confirm it and gives such an interesting perspective on Barry's experience that maybe you can relate to in some way of them being gone. And then, but I think that also is what makes that scene funny. If you
Yes.
filmed it
Yeah.
in a different way, like a more on most shows, you'd see like Barry wakes up, he looks around, he looks over, there's no one in the bed, the camera has followed his vision, as it were. He gets up, the camera follows him as he walks around,
Hmm.
and you don't get any of that. And that infuses some humor because, as I said, I think we know immediately that they're gone, but he doesn't. And so that opens a space for us to kind of laugh at how he doesn't know the truth that we already know, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I took that scene as we're sort of grounded in that one position of the bed. Um, Sally and John, who he needs as part of his life to ground him, are now missing from that. So he's now exploring that space, trying to find them. Whereas we can remain sort of focused on this one thing, but I mean, looks in the scene and is now literally lost without them, right? He just can't, he can't manage to find his way without Whereas we can sort of stay stable on that one scene. He's just going everywhere trying to look for him. Yeah, I thought it was a good decision there.
Yeah, it was great. So then he goes to Jean's.
Yep.
Apparently, he thinks that Sally and John are at Jean's. They're not at Jean's. We don't know where they actually went to. Maybe they're eating at Denny's or something. I don't know. It seems clear to me that Sally was making the point by getting up and leaving him alone. And you need to turn yourself in, And ultimately, we see that working basically as he realizes, no, they're not there. And as he's confronted by Gene's lawyer, was about to sneak out, and all of that. And Barry's ready to give himself up to the police. So he says, call the police. I'm going to turn myself in. When Gene enters the room, shoots him once. Barry falls back. Says, oh, wow. Second shot in the head.
Yeah.
Also, I think hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, just the tie into obviously the title of the episode, the reaction to Breaking Shot. This was not we sort of see when we see the Mask Collector movie, this agony in battle and the agony of getting injured. And this is just more like oh my goodness, this is a very interesting thing. This just happened to me right now,
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's great. Okay, let's try to tie this up. So when Barry, the series first started, you had this comedy series starring Bill Hader. Most people knew Bill Hader from Saturday Night Live, Stefan, all of that. Always been funny. And I recall myself thinking like, okay, I'll check this show out. Bill Hader's funny. The show will probably be funny. And I ultimately found, I think it's way more than that, but I remember some towards the beginning in particular thinking like, okay, well, this is a show about Barry, who's been a hitman, and he wants to stop being a hitman and become an actor. And a lot of people seem to be reading it as a redemption story for Barry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know, I'm not trying to speak for anyone, but just gauging reactions from the world when that turned out to not be the case, because it's very much not the case.
Right.
That lost some people. But I think if we think about this overall, what you get is very much not a redemption story. The murder of Janice does not go away. It refuses to go away. Right? Whereas a lot of stories it would. Like they find a way to like move past that. And ultimately Barry is far from redeemed, and instead it's almost that Gene is corrupted. I don't know if that's the right way to put it.
Yeah, it turns the expectations on its head that you think in that first season that Gene is going to help bring Barry, who decided to no longer be Barry Berkman, be Barry Block, bring him into this, this enlightenment of a new person. Whereas in reality, Barry brought Gene into the depths of hell and to ruin his life, right? And just sort of completely turns the expectations on your head of what you thought the show might be about when you start watching this first season.
Yeah. And that's where, so I think that the Mask Collector, the faux film, I think it plays on a couple of levels. If we think about why does the series end this way, but I think that's one of them. I think Bill Hader is saying like, is this what you wanted? Right? Like, did you want the show to be like this cheesy, lame, thing that you've seen a million times? I know there's a certain level of social commentary, I think, of the like potential refusal to accept that the veteran ex-Marine was the bad guy, that you take the details and twist them in this way that's even more overblown than Barry the series ever had the potential to be, in terms of, in the Mask Collector film, there's nothing about Barry ever being a hitman or anything like that. Just
no,
just a veteran.
He is a hero who was buried with full honors. Yeah.
Oh man, hilarious! I don't know. Right after this era, I saw people who were saying like, "What's the social commentary here?" and so on and so forth. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I have some thoughts about that maybe I've already kind of tried to express. But to me, the main point is it's funny.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I don't think if you don't connect to how it's funny, you're not going to get what it's doing in terms of social commentary. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Um, the social commentary thing really does boil down to whatever happens in real life, you end up with this weirdly polished, potentially inverted version of um, uh, how that story is presented. You
Yeah.
know,
Um,
like I think about, and I don't want to cast any aspersions or whatever here, but remember Pat Tillman, NFL player who
oh yeah, sure.
died in Afghanistan? I think it was in
Hmm.
Afghanistan. I recall reading, it was like he died from friendly fire and
Yes. Yes.
and all of that gets covered over. I think whenever he's mentioned, all those details get covered over, and just celebrate the veteran. The NFL will
Yeah.
do this sometimes, like celebrate the veteran. Um, I don't know, maybe I don't know. Maybe I can't quite land that, but I'm trying to get at something about how there's a expected way for this kind of story to go and be
Hmm.
portrayed. And what you get in this ridiculous mass collector biopic is closer to that,
Yeah. Yeah.
than within the story of Barry itself.
Yeah. I always thought Barry thematically was about control and how we view the idea of control. That Barry in the military didn't have control over his life. Even when he gets out of the military, he doesn't have control because he's sort of under the thumb of Fuchs. So he wants to try to take some of that back by becoming an actor and doing the things that he thinks can fulfill him and enlighten him. But even in trying to do that, he still can't grasp the measure of control that he wants. And that leads to Sally losing what little control or agency she had over her life. It leads to Cousineau losing what control he had, and also leads to the very end where I think Cousineau shoots Barry because he realizes the walls are closing on him. That's the last moment of control he can have left in his life. He's going to go to, he's going to go to
Oh,
jail for these things, and that's the last thing he has left, which is I'm going to take Barry's life. Even though Barry can tell the real story, you know, to hell with that. Where I'm going to take control of this and eliminate him because of what he's done to me.
no, yeah, I think that's good. I don't know if he's even quite thinking that rationally, but I think what you're saying still kind of gets at it. It very much reads to me as though Gene is getting that gun out to use it on himself, because he
Yeah,
gets the gun out before Barry is there. He's sitting in the room alone, and then he hears Barry.
yeah,
Um, but another thing I wanted to say here, me thinking about is, that this Barry story, the character Barry, it is a sad story, and it is a character that I think we feel empathy for.
yes, very much so.
Um, while at the same time, he's a heinous murderer and all of that. Excuse me. So it feels really weird to say this,
Yeah,
since we're talking about a well-produced television show on HBO and all of that. Um, but in some way, I feel like there's this commentary through the fake film, um, that's like somehow like Hollywood can't tell this kind of story that this series has been. Instead, you end up getting this sort of polished version, which is also detached from reality, even as it plays as giving a depiction of reality. So in that film, The Mask Collector, Barry is like just like straightforwardly a good guy, and Cousineau is ultimately straightforwardly like a mustache twirling villain. You just go,
yeah.
oh, that's clear. That's a story that makes sense.
I
Whereas
think
in
I do wonder how much real world commentary on the show Barry, as it sort of started to subvert people's expectations and take people in places they didn't think it was going to go. How much of that idea of the mass collector was a commentary on that, oh, here's what you all think it should be, right? And here's what John gets, at least sort of a picture of his father. But no, actually, the past 32 episodes have been the opposite of this. And I want to just put those two things up against each other and show you that they're not even close to the same. I gave you what I wanted. This is the thing that you might have thought you wanted.
right, whereas in the series, Barry is nuanced. The characters are complex.
Yeah.
You feel sympathy and empathy for people like Barry, Fuchs, Hank.
Yep.
Hank. I mean, we watched the show. Like, I love NoHo Hank. Never mind how many
Yeah.
people he's
Yeah.
killed. But they're rich characters and there's complexity to it and all of that. And yeah, so I think there is that level of almost meta commentary. And then the very last thing to talk about here, though, is that, as you mentioned, John is watching this with his friend. His mother has forbid him from watching it, presumably, like she knows
Hmm.
it exists. Or way earlier in the episode, when they were in Hank's custody, Sally told him that Barry was a murderer,
Yeah.
that she was also a murderer. And she said, tells him, "You're a good person, I'm not." And hit on that scene. It's towards the beginning of the episode. He's however many years older now. I don't know, 4 or 5 years older.
Yeah.
But the episode ends with a reaction shot of his face. I know he's buying it. He's buying the glossy
Yeah.
mass collector version of his father's story.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. I wondered if it was sort of a preservation thing where Sally is she's trying to keep that glossed over version of Barry away from John, so John sort of understands the reality and is not influenced by other or people's ideas or impressions or stories about who Barry was, or it's more of a I don't know. I think she just wanted to not ever have John feel like Barry was the version of himself that he saw in the movie. The
Right.
Barry who's your dad is complex, was a bad guy. Are they telling stories of each other to each other about what Barry used to do? I don't know.
I don't know.
And
I mean,
wanting to
I would
protect John from the rest. I just it's hard to say. I think she's just not wanting John to see his father in that way.
I agree with that completely. And that lands for me. I think that's definitely the case. And I would imagine that it's not something they talk about a lot. I don't imagine that Sally's
Yeah.
talking about Barry a lot at home with John or whatever. But she knows the movie exists. She has a feeling for how it's going to portray things. Maybe watch a trailer or something like that. Maybe sufficiently clear. She doesn't want John to watch it. No, what's more interesting to me, or it's a little bit harder for me to like spit out an interpretation, is that it does seem like John is taken in by it. And I guess on one level that makes sense. You want to buy into the fantasy version of the father, your father, right?
Hmm.
You don't want to believe your father was a murderous hitman, which Sally at least
Yeah.
told him, long ago. Um, this also kind of lines up with the official version of events, apparently.
Yeah.
But
And I also wonder if it's just Sally just didn't want him to see a sort of a deified version of his father and think, okay, if John has at all any of the same nature and nurture that Barry had and could go down that path. Oh, look, I could do this and look how I'll be sort of set up as a hero no matter what. I don't know how Sally reacts to that. Sort of, does she think that there's some tendencies in there that Barry had?
I don't know. I don't
And
really think so. I don't know. I mean, I don't. I think that she does believe that John's a good kid and all.
yeah, yeah,
Does the right thing, makes the right choices, and from what we see, that fits. Um,
yeah. I think
I don't
so.
know. I guess where I'm just trying to land here as we wrap up is, to me, in a meaningful way, that last shot of John's face where he's buying into this bullshit story is the saddest part of the show,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's still funny.
yeah,
It's also funny. Yeah.
yeah. But all it takes is a Hollywood story for him to buy into something his dad was not.
Well, and it's so overblown. It's so like,
Yeah.
you know, uh, chewing some scenery. It's like, I thought you knew how to follow orders, Barry. Pop, 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 pop.
I will
Oh
say,
my God.
watching this again makes me wish we had started the podcast, 2 months earlier. We could have done Barry.
Yeah, would have been fun. It's a great show. I think thanks for revisiting this with me.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about it before we wrap up?
No, that's good for me.
Yeah, I think we really dug into this more than I thought we would even, but that's good. I enjoyed talking about it. So hopefully you all have enjoyed listening to us talk about the series finale of Barry this week. We'll be back next week with our usual news and notes, the first part of the pod, and then Ryan's choice for his best episode of the past year, excluding the bear. What have you
Yeah.
chosen for us, Ryan?
Yeah, we have to eliminate about 3 or 4 episodes of the Bear because we know that would be one of the ones that I would pick. So, perhaps not quite as deep or meaningful or thoughtful conversation we've had this week. Next week, we're going to talk about an episode of the final season of Curb Your Enthusiasm. We're talking about Lawn Jockey, one of the ones I thought was the best one in this final season.
And if you insist,
Lawn Jockey Barry finale about the same in terms of
they're both comedies.
yeah.
Both comedies. You have seen the episode.
Yeah. And I
It
will say, if
does.
you've not seen Curb, I think you can go watch Lawn Jockey without any context and get a real sense of what this show is about, a sense of what Curb has done over the past 24 years while it was on there.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a fairly exemplary episode, and it is quite funny and good. And there'll be some things to talk about. Definitely some things to talk about. Might have to be a little
I
careful.
think so. I think we will be very careful next week.
Be a little careful on that one. Anyhow, so yeah, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week talking about Curb Your Enthusiasm. Again, along with our usual news and notes in the first part of the pod. Um, check out tvobsessive.com. You can find articles on Barry there. I read about season 3. Andrew Grievous read about season 4. I think Andrew also read about season 2 and season 1. I stepped
Okay.
in on season 3 because he was busy, as I recall there. But so anyway, if you want to read about Barry, you can read about it on tvobsessive.com. You can follow the site on social media. Look for TV Obsessive on Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and so on. If you are listening on YouTube, please do give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you're not on YouTube, maybe go check out the YouTube. We've got some stuff there, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks for the good conversation. See you then.